everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sam. I'm in client services here at the Retirement Group, and I will be moderating today's presentation. I'm going to be throwing some very useful resources into the chat throughout the presentation. They will link you to our retirement guide that is focused on AT&T, as well as a library of all of our past recordings, and a link to book an appointment with an advisor after this webinar. So please take advantage of those. Today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on the significant concerns related to retiring from AT&T, as well as exploring potential opportunities for retirees and those who may be leaving AT&T in the near future. I'll be bringing our speaker, Patrick Ray, on shortly to address all of this with you. But before I do that, I must remind you that although we work very closely with both retired and active employees at AT&T, we are not affiliated nor endorsed by AT&T. The Retirement Group is a completely independent group of financial advisors. I'd also like to let you know that at the end of the presentation, forgive me, we will be having a very short question and answer session. So if you find that you have a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to enter it in the Q&A box. It's completely anonymous, and Patrick will be getting to as many as he can at the end of his presentation. So I think I got all of the boring stuff out of the way. I'm going to bring on our speaker for today, Patrick Ray. Patrick?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Sam, for the kind introduction, and welcome to our workshop today. Today, we're going to be talking about, specifically for our AT&T folks, what we call retiring on purpose with a purpose. And typically that's associated with a plan. And so I'll be talking in depth about some of the things that we encourage people to think through and to remind them of what we know is successful when you're transitioning from an employee to a retiree. And so we have a lot to cover. And just as a reminder, kind of what Sam was mentioning earlier, there's going to be some very useful links in the chat that you can find access to, which we encourage you to check out at your own leisure. But in case you haven't heard of the Retirement Group before, we've been around with a team of advisors since the early 90s, and we have a ton of experience in working with folks specifically from AT&T. And even though we're not affiliated or endorsed by the company in any way, we have thousands of references to basically have run into any scenario you can think of, whether you're a manager or a non-manager, or you had service on one side and went to another side, or you were with a subsidiary of some sort and then got purchased, and there's a bunch of different pension plans, etc. And so what we find the tough thing to focus on is the actual plan that's consistent with things that are important to you and your family with respect to the income that you might need or want to enjoy, and the things that are important to you to actually actively seek out and do during retirement. And most of that comes with one of the complementary services that we offer, which is trying to help you analyze all this stuff through something called a cash flow analysis. So if you haven't already done this before, we encourage you to do this. And I'll talk at the end about what's involved and how to get in touch with us in the event that you're open to doing so. But basically, it's a way for you to stress test your overall goals and what you've done today to see if you're on track to meet what's important to you in the future. If you're not already following us on LinkedIn, please do that. You can take a picture of this QR code that's on the screen now, which would get you direct access to where we have a lot of updates for our AT&T folks about the economic conditions and the things that are going on at the company, specifically with the benefits and how interest rates are affecting your pension plan and all these kind of things. Very useful stuff. And so if you're not already doing so, I encourage you to do that. And with that, we'll get started with some of the things that we want to cover, but mostly to start with a big picture thought, right? Where we know that our successful people who have transitioned and been comfortable leading into and ongoing into retirement was because they did some preparation. And most of the time we want to start with a checklist that has a number of things that are line itemed, if you will, with things that we know are important to either understand better or have a handle on so that you can enjoy a successful retirement instead of having a stressful retirement, if you will, trying to manage things that in some cases are out of your control. And so the emotions that are involved in this planning process are real. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's an actual study that's done that shows that the second most stressful thing that we'll ever have to go through as a human is retirement. And as odd as that is to think, it's unfortunately only below losing a spouse. That's the number one most stressful thing. And so the thought of giving up your paycheck and trying to engage in using all of the capital that you've used in an effort to support and live off of that for the rest of your life is not only stressful, but it's untimely for some folks, because oftentimes, unfortunately, at the company that you guys work for at AT&T, you're asked to leave the payroll unbeknownst to you, because they're doing some kind of surplusing, or they're doing some reorgs with moving, businesses and different aspects of the company from one place to another. And so it leaves people in a position where they haven't even planned for this before. And so this all encompasses this checklist where we feel like you could have a lot of value to yourself in your planning stage if you just think about and go through some of these things on what they would do and what they look like for you and your own family. Decreasing your risk and associating this with what the volatility is when you actually do retire. Many people think that when they're getting closer to retirement, they should, for example, put the brakes on from a risk management perspective. And while in theory that may sound like a smart thing to do because you're in your early 60s, for example, and you're getting ready to give up your paycheck and live in retirement, but the reality is many of you will have another third of your life to live. Okay, so in many cases, the last third of your life is the planning process of what you had worked up to get to and accumulate funds that will last you through this window of time. And so putting on the brakes, for example, to get to, oh, I'm going to retire in the next 30 to 60 days or 6 months or whatever, when you don't plan on spending all of your money at that given window of time, is often not in your best interest if you look at the likelihood of you living past, or to at least, or past life expectancy. And so because of that, a cash flow analysis is unbelievably vital to you to have put some parameters in play for some assumptions so that you can see what this looks like over your work years leading up to and into your retirement years, so you can understand the exchange of giving up your paycheck and then trying to create one from what you've saved and worked up until that point to do. And so increasing your retirement income is a big deal, right? We want to maximize your income, but it also correlates with the stress of retiring and the volatility and risk that's associated with that. And oh, by the way, there's taxes involved because, for example, 100% of your pension has never been through the tax system before. So every dollar you take out, you're going to pay 100% income tax on. And so there's a whole conglomerate of things that need to be addressed and affiliated with your goals to see what it looks like 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And especially if you're married, you have a spouse, so there's more than one individual involved for this planning process to exist. And so we take this very seriously with respect to the process of helping people achieve and maintain a successful retirement. And this is one of the vital tools, in our opinion, to have in your arsenal of things to be affiliated with, for sure. And the last is to have a team, a philosophy, a plan, things that are able to be fact-checked and stress-checked, if you will, and maybe an idea or two to bounce off of, and somebody who's been through this before, which is obviously what we do for a living. And we've helped thousands of people over the years get into this position. And so it's certainly an easy transition for us. And so we feel pretty strongly about the checklist that we just went through as one of the key factors of you maintaining and to obtaining a successful retirement. So we're going to talk about some changes today. We're going to talk about some lump sum changes, and I'll give you an idea on how the pension plan is impacted by the current interest rate environment. We're going to talk a little bit about how real estate impacts your retirement decisions and what's involved with that. We're going to talk about inflation, and then we're going to talk about how to avoid some of the biggest mistakes we have ran across over the years. And ultimately that correlates to having a team of helpful advisors that have your best interests in mind to meet your overall goals and objectives. And so first and foremost, we want to look at the big picture of where your money is going to actually come from. And so most of you on the call today are going to rely on some, if not all, of these pools of money. And so you have Social Security, you have your pension, and you also hopefully have a 401k of some sort. And those are typically the three core pools that you'll draw or be able to draw assets from in many cases. But there's another one here called real estate, of course, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how that plays into a role of being a source of monies for you to effectively live on. But change number one, where we're talking about the pension, right? Basically, the biggest issue with the pension is the correlation of what happens to your pension when interest rates change. Okay, so when interest rates go up, you have a negative impact, and when interest rates go down, you have a positive impact. And so in a perfect world, as an AT&T employee, you're looking to retire in the lowest interest rate environment possible. And unfortunately, I have news for you. You've missed that boat by many, many years, because actually the lowest interest rate that we've ever seen for the pension at AT&T is back in the early 2010, 2011 era, where LSO and MPO and EPO actually took place. For those managers in the on the call might have remembered that time frame about 10, 12 years ago. But this grid or this graph kind of gives you an outlook of what happens. And if you can imagine a teeter-totter, it'll give you a really good illustration of what happens to your lump sum if the interest rates change. And so when the interest rates go down, your pension plan goes up in value. And when the interest rates go up in value, your pension plan goes down in value. And so roughly for every 1% of that interest rate swing, you can see your pension value change somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 and upwards of 12% as a percentage. And so what this looks like in the history of just transitioning from last year to this year, there are 3 different segments. And so you might actually wonder when you log into Fidelity and you see these different areas that you can put interest rates in, and they're called segment 1 and segment 2 and segment 3. Those are the different avenues of the bonds and the bond pricing that affects your lump sum. And so segment 1 deals with the first 5 years of your retirement. Then the segment 2 deals with years 6 through 20, and then segment 3 deals with 21 years plus. And so for most of you, segment 2 is the biggest impact on your pension lump sum changing by interest rates. And so what this illustration shows you is the difference between the November of 2022 rates versus the November of 2021 rates. And so as a quick refresher, the interest rates change once a year, and they're established in November, and they're good for the following year. And so basically for anyone who leaves between January 1st of 2023 and December 31st of 2023, you're going to get the impact of the rate that's shown here, where segment 1 is 5.09%, segment 2 is 5.60%, and segment 3 is 5.41%. And so the significance of you depended on what heritage you came from, because for some of you, you have to be off the payroll at a different time, like an AT&T, a legacy T person has to be off the payroll by November 30th to be able to get December's rate, which still falls into this particular tax year, and therefore gives you these rates. But the reason we're covering this slide is just to show you the net impact of the difference from one year to the next when interest rates go up, which has a negative impact to your lump sum. And many of you are considering the lump sum as a pension option when you decide to distribute your funds after retiring. And so this is something that's very important for you to understand. Now, the good news is, if you're past the time where you had any transition to be able to take advantage of this and leave the payroll and you're still working, what is not impacted by the interest rates are the annuity payments. And so that's still an option for those of you who are going to leave the payroll, and you can choose to take the annuity payment as an option. And that number is not impacted by the interest rate swings. But for those of you who are open to or interested in taking the lump sum to get control of those funds when you decide to leave the company, this is unbelievably vital to understand. And so the more you know about how the interest rate correlates to your pension, the better off that you're going to be long term, for sure. So the second thing that we want to talk about is the real estate aspect of the planning process. And so there is a bunch of key housing data, and we get a lot of questions about this. And so home equity is at record levels, right? And so even though the interest rates have spiked and where it's not maybe as favorable today as it was 6 months ago to buy a home, for example, or to refinance your home, home equity levels are still at record highs. And so basically this increases the ability for you to absorb or access cash to produce retirement income. And so back in 2008, which we often get references from, well, wait a minute, I don't want to rely on that because back in 2008, there was a real estate crash. That's true. There was a real estate correction back in that time frame. And so the problem is, though, it's a huge difference between today versus back then. And basically, the biggest issue is back in 2007 and 2008, we had way too much supply versus the demand that was in contention at the time. And so because they were too many people offering to sell their homes and not enough people wanting to buy them, it created an inverse problem where today we have the exact opposite happening. There's still a home shortage of people wanting to buy homes, even though we're at a higher interest rate environment where it would cost them more money to actually produce or create the same home environment that they were living from one place to another. And so remember, replacement costs for your home serve as a floor for the value, and it allows you the current cost of reproducing home, which is currently increasing. And so basically, this reduces the probability of a crash in terms of what we're trying to do is to compare what happened back in 2007 and 2008. And so the higher rates give people a short-term ability to take that cash and earn some interest, because the short-term interest rate environment has produced higher numbers, so that you're earning more money on your short-term T-bills and CDs and fixed income investments. And so this gives you an opportunity to hold some paper and earn some interest on that money while you are planning on selling your home. Now, the impact of inflation, as I talked a little bit about a few minutes ago, is significant if you're assuming that the lump sum is the distribution option that you plan to take. But the catch to this is that there are many fixed income assets that do quite poorly in an interest rate environment that's rising. And so, because typically what happens when you have a rising interest rate environment is bond prices decline. And if we asked a general population of folks what the correct ratio of stocks to bonds is, some portion of money is going to go into bonds. And the theory behind doing that is to protect the risk that you're taking in, or offset the risk that you're taking in your equity-based portfolio. But if you have an environment where the interest rates are climbing, then you have a reduced portfolio value in what is supposed to be protecting the risk that you're taking in your equity portfolio. And so because of this, it makes a very tough planning process to allocate funds in an environment where we're trying to be a safer safe haven for the risk that you're taking in your equity portfolio, and still producing some interest on your fixed income investments, which we just talked about do quite poorly in a rising interest rate environment. So in the end, what we care about most is avoiding the biggest mistakes, which we've seen over the years. And a lot of that is avoided if you have a team that can actually help you plan for one of the biggest financial decisions that you'll ever have to make. And so you want to think about a few things. First of all, the biggest question on a buzzword we get is if you're a fiduciary or not. And so we are fiduciaries here at the Retirement Group. And there's a description of that in the cash flow analysis that we give to folks to help you better understand what that technically means. But basically, it says that we're here to do what's best for you. And as rudimentary as that sounds, that's an actual thing. And so because of the fiduciary responsibilities that we have, we're always going to be looking out for your best interest. Another thing to consider yourself want to understand for sure is the fees, the structure of how everyone is getting compensated. And so I don't think any of the people that I've spoke to in the most recent 10 to 15 years or so has assumed that we work for free. But the reality is, if it's not disclosed to you, and more importantly, you're not clear on how it works and where the fees are coming from and what you're actually paying, it's a detriment to you, and it's more stressful than it should be. And so you should get that elephant out of the room for sure, and talk about the fees, what you're paying, how much you're paying, and where they're coming from, etc. Another thing to think about is the investment team. And if you're working with a team that has investment individuals involved that can help you plan and meet a portfolio that's designed to assess and address your risk and your things that are important to you, your need for income and your tolerance for volatility and fluctuation, and how long you might need the money for, and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we're here to do, obviously, as well. And then you might think, just to ask yourself once, what it is that you expect to gain from a relationship from someone in our shoes. You know, it's really hard to, from our standpoint, meet goals and objectives if you don't have any expectations. So if your expectations are low, oftentimes the result of what you gain or get are low. And so it's good to think about some of the things that are important to you, and maybe write them down on a yellow pad so that you can have a better understanding of what happens when it comes time for you to have to decide what team is best, and which one of these teams you might want to work with if you're choosing to work with an advisory group in retirement. And so, of course, you want to know if they offer you a financial analysis. This is a complimentary service that we do that I talked about. It's a cash flow projection, which is basically a way for us to spend some time with you, learn about what's important to you and your goals and objectives, and how much money you need and that kind of thing, and how much money you have to produce these kind of things, and then put that in a package that's kind of an easy to read thing that we review with you, so that you have a better understanding of what this means to you over time. And of course, this should be updated periodically, which we do for our clients on a very regular basis. So 74% of the people over the age of 50 do not have a written financial plan. And this hit me pretty hard last summer, given the fact that I just turned 50. And thinking to myself, man, it's kind of odd, because all of my friends and many of the people that I know that are close to my age or younger, like my wife, or many of the folks that we enjoy time with on our personal time, a lot of them don't have written financial plans, even though they know what we do or I do for a living and what I've talked about and the importance of saving and planning. And many of these people don't have pension plans, et cetera, like, which doesn't apply to a lot of the folks that are on this call, because actually at AT&T, you have a pension plan for the most part. And so you've got another source of funds to be able to rely upon. And it's just a shame to think that you don't want to spend the time when someone in our shoes is willing to give you the time for free to help you develop a strategy that's consistent with making sure you're on track to meet your overall goals. And so this is a real thing. And the less of this becomes of you, the better. In other words, we're delighted to help you with this to make sure you're not one of these statistics. And so you can reach out to us in one of a number of ways. Okay, first of all, you can email us at info@theretirementgroup.com. That's for sure. You can email us there anytime, and we're delighted to get back to you, obviously. You can also call the office, and that phone number is 800-900-5867. And someone would be glad to either try to get your questions answered right away or put you in touch with an advisor who can do that, or put you on a calendar with an advisor that can do that for you. If you choose to schedule that time on your own, you're welcome to take a picture of this QR code to the left, and it will get you access to a calendar where you can choose a time window that's helpful for you and easy for you to deal with. And we'll get you on the calendar with an advisor that can help you for sure. And then that picture on the right is, again, the link to our LinkedIn page, where I encourage you to follow us if you're not already doing so. So with that, I want to make our time available for the questions that I know we have, because we have a few of these. And so let me pull these up real quick so I can make sure we get to these here. Okay, so let's talk about this first question. What is a backdoor Roth IRA, and who is eligible to use this strategy? This is a great question. And if you have not already checked out our value seminar that we do, or the webinar that we put on, where we talk a lot about tax efficient retirement and basically getting you to a point where this gets in depth instead of giving you a general answer, I encourage you to do that. And you can use those links that Sam dropped in the chat to get access to those videos that we've done in the past on that. And the answer to the question is, the backdoor Roth IRA is for people who can make a contribution to an IRA. And even though that's not a tax deductible contribution, the idea is you make a contribution to an IRA and then you absolutely convert it to a Roth IRA immediately. And there's no tax implications to doing that. And so the only criteria is for you to be able to make a contributory deposit to an IRA and then ultimately convert that immediately to a Roth IRA. And this allows you to funnel a nice chunk of change into a tax-free environment. And this is one of the strategies that we talk in depth to our folks about, to try to make the most of all the pools of capital. You remember that slide I showed that had 4 different avenues of where you could get your retirement money. Within the investment part of your 401k, you could do it inside your 401k on the Roth side if you choose, although that doesn't do any benefit for current reduction of income and the earnings that you're making today. But it's still another pool of capital. And the more that you have in there, the further your potential assets could potentially last you, simply because the difference between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, by the way, is that you'll have to take mandatory distributions from your traditional IRAs, which would consist of, for example, the bucket of money that would hold your pension lump sum, as well as your 401k that's not been all the pre-tax money and all that. That's in the IRA. That money's going to have to be distributed to you under the RMD rules. And so while the Roth IRA does not have to follow those same things. And actually, as it turns out, our second question apparently is about the RMDs. And so what is required minimum distribution and when do they need to take it? And so this is a great question and a good segue, because the rules have just changed. And as it turns out, recently, the rules have changed several times. And so what used to be 70 and a half. And so if you turned 70 and a half, that pool of money that was holding your lump sum and your pre-tax 401k dollars that we talked about, that money would be subject to a requirement of a minimum being removed each year, effectively to start the cycle of filtering that money through the tax system. That's basically the reason why you have to do that. And so whether you need the money or not is irrelevant. You have to take it out, you have to pay tax on the money, but you don't have to spend it. And so often we lose sight of the if you don't have a team, someone encourage you to remember this. It's not mandatory that you spend it, right? It's just mandatory that you pay tax on it. So what happens is you can filter that into the after-tax portion of your retirement assets or your individual brokerage account and still have the money invested. So as long as it cycles through the tax system, you're allowed to do so. So that used to be 70 and a half. And a few years ago, they changed that to age 72, which extended it for about a year and a half, which was great. So the longer you extend it, the more tax deferred interest that you're actually able to earn, of course, which is great. But now, starting January of this year, it's 73. And if you don't turn 75 before 2033, then 73 is your deadline. But if you turn 75 or greater after 2033, then 2033 is your new retirement minimum distribution requirement, which is age 75. So it's a good question. Certainly the responsibility that you have as a taxpayer is important for you to understand. This is another arrow in the quiver of having a team member on your staff, if you will, so that we take care of this for our clients to make sure that they're on top of their required minimum distributions as a value-added service. And so, yeah, that's a big deal, and certainly something that you don't want to mess up. That's for sure. Next question. What is the retirement savings goal by the end of the 60s, and why is delaying Social Security beneficial? So I think I understand what this question is alluding to, which is how much of an amount of money that you need to have by the time you're in your mid to late 60s, for example, which is correlated to when you could potentially take your Social Security benefit. And so, boy, the answer is so broad. It depends. That's I know that's kind of boring as an answer, but that's the truth. And so this is one of the main reasons that we run a cash flow analysis, is to help you analyze not only the amount of money that you need to support what it is that you need to live on, but also to show you different variations of if you took your Social Security, for example, at age 62 versus age 67, or postponing it to age 70. And oh, by the way, some of the important information that we need with respect to this Social Security thought process is if your spouse has their own benefit or not. Because if you have a spouse in your household, you'll want to include this thought process into the decision of when you start your Social Security payment. Because remember, when one of the spouses dies, the remaining spouse is getting the highest of whatever payment comes into the household. So if you can afford, for example, to push off your Social Security payment as the highest wage earner, because that's going to give you the highest payment, then you might choose to do so. You just have to have the assets in an effort to support that decision to postpone it from, say, 62 to age 67, or even out to age 70, for example. So this is a question that we get very, very often. We have a special Social Security analysis that we're delighted to do for you to show you this as the time value of money and what it is. Thinking in terms of displacing this payment and finding out another place or an avenue to get the funds from if you're going to defer. And so this is an ever-going debate, and a great one to have for sure. And if you can afford to continue to put it off, you're probably in a pretty good financial position, which is a good problem to have. And we're delighted to have this discussion with you further, for sure. Okay, what looks like the last question. How can you ensure that your retirement income plan will last long enough, and why is it important to respect inflation? So, although I didn't go into detail about this, this is what I was referring to when I said people often afford or think they can afford to put the brakes on when they get close to or lead up to retirement and no longer take any risk in their portfolio. But in many cases, the lasting window between when you retire and your life expectancy for both spouses, assuming that you're retired, is imperative. And the reason that you have to respect inflation is because of what this window of time means to the capital that you've saved to live and utilize for the rest of your life. And so if you have it in a fixed source of income or bucket of money that's only generating you a certain amount of interest each year, it's likely that the longevity aspect of how long you live outweighs, from an inflation perspective, what that bucket of money can produce you. So you have to be very careful about putting on the brakes, so to speak, when you're in your early 60s, as an example, when you retire, because if you live out to life expectancy, it's another 25 or 30 years. You got a pretty long chunk of time to make sure that this pool of capital lasts you. And so there's a lot of variations to this. This is another reason why we run the cash flow analysis, is to kind of analyze If you're in a position to take more risk or need to take more risk than another person, maybe your income need is lower than another family. And so these are all things that we consider for sure when it comes time to trying to figure out the best avenue to give you as far as advice is concerned. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the presentation this afternoon. I hope you got value out of what it is that I had to cover today. And that pretty much wraps it up for the afternoon. So I hope you enjoyed what we had to talk about. Check out the links that Sam dropped into the chat for some of the stuff we've recorded in the past, as I'm confident you'll find some value out of doing so when you get around to it. So we appreciate your time this afternoon, and that'll do it.